Hey. You know when I break out the hoodie, get casual with you guys, it's just going to be a different vibe. It's just going to be spitting truths a little bit. So that's where we're at tonight. And right here, your friendly neighborhood Reddit mod coming right at you. That's right. I'm one of the mods of Reddit's home for original poetry. OCPoetry. Reddit. That's the brain trust that gave society Gamergate, Pizzagate, fake lawyers, fake doctors, fake news, fake investors, fake currencies, where the best advice comes from Russian bots and Chinese counterintelligence on tea break. Yep. Don't get me wrong, though, the OC has its moments. I've had some great discussions with people from all walks of life. And I cherish the wonderful friendships I've made with poets all around the world. Yeah, I'm talking to you guys. I love that excitement, especially the excitement that newer poets have, putting their work out there for the first time, those very first verses. The excitement they feel seeing their words out there, of getting the chance to be read by anyone, anywhere, anytime. God, that's beautiful. I also love to hear from our more experienced members, the ones who aggressively solicit advice, who don't leave me alone. Yeah, you guys. Who challenge themselves, who push ahead with new poems showing their commitment to getting better. Gosh, that's so invigorating. But I also think OCPoetry and social media writ large does a disservice to both the noobs and the veterans. That's because the OC only shows poets this really narrow band of what's possible in poetry today. And a lot of experienced poets really have no incentive to post to OCPoetry because they can get paid to place their work in literary journals, or at least they can try to get their name out there. Well, it's nice that there's no gatekeeper on OCP. That also means there's no prestige either. Instead, what the OC cultivates and celebrates is, for the most part, sadly, kind of a superficial understanding of what poetry is and can do, because almost no one there knows any better. Newsflash, that's not their fault. There's no problem with not knowing stuff. The problem starts when we push back against those trying to educate, trying to uplift, trying to challenge, which has been my mission for about a year now. Whew. And thanks for helping me ding the 100 subscribers. Booyah, by the way. So yeah, you could say that I'm a troll. Guilty as charged. But I troll because I want to help. I want to offer a lifesaver to those of you who really want to lift yourself out of the poetry cesspool. Because at its best, OCPoetry is a beautiful place to gain confidence, meet other poets, and have some fun with words. But at its worst, it can be pretty dark. Bad, solipsistic poetry getting upvotes. Nursery rhymes masquerading as satire. Clumsy, mean-spirited erotica that couldn't arouse a prison inmate. And lots of suicide notes. So many. They got a bot to remind all those prospective victims that there's a number to call to get help. Yep. Yeah. They got a bot for that. And the comments section, God, just this endless parade of inane comments about how I can relate and how your poem has great flow. I hate to see this Joe Roganification of poetry. The folks who openly campaign against expertise, who dislike snobs, who attack serious criticism. Now, I want to slow down here and really dig into what I'm saying, since I think a lot of people swing and miss on this stuff. When I criticize a poem, I'm implicitly saying there's better and worse. And that, as an art form, poetry demands study, practice, and dedication. I'm not judging the person most of the time. Certainly, talent can be a factor, but I always emphasize that work ethic part because, as Calvin Coolidge said, unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. And there's these kind of two very common arguments against my stance, and I accept that. My stance is just like any other skill, poetry has levels, right? But there's people who say, well, it really doesn't. The first criticism, the first people come right back at me, is that all high culture stuff like theater, literary novels, classical music, fine art, whatever, it's all been corrupted by politics. Now it's just all crap. Now, some say it's crap because it's political. It's been politicized, co-opted by academia and political correctness. And some think it just went to shit after some moment in civilization, like T.S. Eliot's Wasteland or Duchamp's Urinal or whatever. I don't know. Sometimes you find this like kind of shifting goalposts, right? Where when you really like wade into people's argument, it kind of just like crumbles on closer inspection. Speaking of weak arguments, let's look at the second argument against high culture. So this one is that high culture is inherently prejudiced, and that for too long we had all these rich straight white male men, straight white men, that like shat on every single culture that didn't fit into their limited worldview, and that this whole idea of like poetry or any art form that requires specialized study and you got to go through all these hoops and indoctrination and all this other shit and got to buy into this narrow Eurocentric worldview. They're saying, all that stuff's time has come, right? So what do they propose as the alternative? Instead of looking at art in terms of like quality, right, where there could be better or worse, and there's like this like highbrow at the top and like midbrow and lowbrow. Instead, they just started like, well, it's all equal. You can only look at the agenda of a piece of art. Like, what is it trying to say? And then you can look at the identity of the author. That's the only thing you can evaluate. And what's funny, right? Funny, is I'm sympathetic to both these arguments. I actually kind of believe we tend to undervalue the importance of historical literature, not just from Europe, but from all over. And I also think on the other end of it, we tend to have not done enough to redress historical bias and injustice. So we can do better on both of those sides. But I don't want to create a like false both sides equivalency bullshit here. The American right's anti-intellectual descent into darkness is 50 years going strong. And I may not agree with every left-wing finger-wagging intellectual Lilliputian, but I'll take those guys over the tiki-bearing neo-Nazis any day. But, kind of off course here. In any event, both those arguments from the right and left have this core central motivation, I think, which is they're not completely made in good faith. People who buy into this bunk that there could be no sense of value in literature, or that all literature being produced today is garbage, are buying into this, not because it's well-reasoned, because I think it just falls apart when you start to examine it, but because it appeals to a cultural nihilism. It appeals to this hatred of anything cultivated, difficult, and refined. And I got news for you. Great culture is inherently exclusive. It excludes the common. It excludes the boorish. It excludes the intemperate. And above all, it excludes the impatient. Right? You got to work at it. That's humbling. It's not for everybody. We need expertise in literature today. And I don't think it's a joke. I don't think it's funny anymore when people tell me poetry is pointless, bro, or that literature is pointless. People who think it's pointless, they think that because it's convenient for them to think that. Because thinking anything else would threaten them. It would threaten their anxiety about their own lack of self-cultivation. So to the next person who comes at me and tells me it's pointless, I say, it might be pointless to you, but that says more about you than it does about poetry. Poetry gives us something we as a society desperately need. A place orthogonal to the political where differences can be mediated with lower stakes. And we can take the edge off some of that growing barbarity of our public sphere. Because culture doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's just not the case that there's work and leisure and the two divide neatly like day and night. We can't say work creates meaning and leisure consumes it. Though an economy whose primacy is based on a middle class going into debt to buy gizmos imported from China, you could kind of see why this was the reality we were taught to embrace, at least in the television era. But even if we wanted to, that old center cannot hold. Not in the iPhone era, where the work is where all of our jobs, all work is increasingly interwoven into every part of our lives. And leisure is never but a click away. Let's look at this, man. I mean, there's just a strong business incentive to reduce our appreciation for complexity and richness. Just ask Zuckerberg. And to YouTube, while I appreciate this platform, I'll understand if you need to take this video down. The diminution and flattening of culture, this notion that there's no learning curve to appreciating and producing great culture, is part and parcel of a growing populism that's cutting like wildfire through our democratic institutions. The traditional defense of the classics, of literature, of great books, of the humanities writ large has always been critical thinking. But can't that just be learned just as well, if not better, by studying mathematics, engineering, chemistry, and really any field where truth can be isolated, measured, and verified? Color me skeptical, but I find no evidence that reading philosophy, novels, poetry, and plays somehow makes you smarter than people who spend that time doing something else equally rigorous. But I do think that most humans outside the most careerist of us sooner or later dip in to the culture to kick back and relax. For most of us, it's probably 2 to 5 hours a day where we get some exercise, cook some food, watch some shows, get in some gaming, check up on the social medias, or fucking hit the pubs. Plus whatever else we get do on the weekends. If you add up all this time, week on week, month on month, year on year, it ends up totaling to a lot of fucking time. Like the food you eat, those calories add up. I have a hard time believing that a steady diet of cartoons, fantasy violence, celebrity worship, sports, and news comedians is making anybody any smarter. It's my position that people who read more widely and more aggressively are going to find a richer, more nuanced, and more rewarding life outside of work, and will spend less time trapped by social media updates and fat-headed ideologues. I know. It's a pretty weak defense of high culture, admit. But I can find you a better one. Here's Czesław Miłosz, the Nobel Prize-winning Polish poet, who delivered this lecture about 40 years ago. Here's an excerpt. Citizens in a modern state, no longer mere dwellers in their village and district, know how to read and write, but are unprepared to receive nourishment of a higher intellectual order. They are sustained artificially on a lower level by television, films, and illustrated magazines, media that are for the mind what two small slippers were for women's feet in old China. Listen to Miłosz. Don't undersell yourself. You have a greater human potential. Aspire. Be ambitious. Read a little. After you've watched this, close your tabs. Go read a book. We'll all be better for it.